It wasn't a sound that stopped Diesel. It was memory. Old memory. Buried memory. He froze mid-step, tail rigid, nostrils flaring at the crackling scent of something long dead, but never gone. 6 years of search and rescue work hadn't prepared this German shepherd for what he just sensed beneath the concrete slab. It wasn't a missing hiker or a scared kid lost in the woods. This was different. This was final. The pneumatic drill thundered against the ground at the construction site of Greensboro University's North Wing redevelopment. A dozen workers in neon vests and hard hats barely heard the bark over the pounding machinery. But one did. "Kill the drill!" yelled Dale Holloway, throwing his arm in the air. The machine ground to a halt, the sudden silence deafening. Diesel stood still in the dust, nose pressed to a jagged crack in the concrete. His handler, Sergeant Mike Brewster, caught up, tugging gently on the leash. "What is it, buddy?" he asked, already knowing. Diesel wasn't trained to react like this unless it was serious. Not a faint whiff. Not a maybe. No, this was something certain. Dale jogged over, still clutching his helmet. "We hit something?" Diesel responded with another bark, low and urgent. He started pawing at the edges of the cracked slab, then looked back, eyes wide, pleading. Mike pulled out his radio. "We need Detective Ramirez, and tape off this whole area, now." Detective Frank Ramirez wasn't the kind of man who startled easy. 62, Vietnam vet's son, 3 decades on the force, 2 divorces, and a half-built fishing cabin he never got around to finishing. He'd been counting the weeks until retirement. This wasn't how he planned to spend his Tuesday. But when a canine handler said, "We've got something buried," Frank listened. He ducked under the yellow tape and approached the spot where Diesel had first barked. The dog sat back on his haunches now, tail flicking the dust, still alert. "What do we have?" Mike pointed to a small, glittering object embedded in the crack. "That." Frank knelt, brushing away the loose concrete dust with gloved fingers. A delicate necklace emerged. The kind you'd find in a freshman dorm. Silver with a butterfly pendant. Still intact after who knows how many years. Then he spotted the edge of a weathered leather wallet. It slid out too easily. Still held together. Inside, a driver's license and student ID card. Emily Carter, born 1975, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. The photo hit him like a shovel to the gut. Young, bright eyes, wide smile, hair like a 90s shampoo commercial. He flipped to the back of the ID. Spring semester 1994. That was 13 years ago. The next to arrive was forensic specialist Carmen Ellis, black boots crunching over gravel as she approached with a tablet in one hand and a high ponytail bouncing with each step. She was all fire and logic, the youngest forensic lead in the department and barely 31. "What's the sitch?" she asked, crouching beside Frank. He held up the ID. "Emily Carter, you and Susie." Last seen, or at least recorded, in 1994. Carmen's brow furrowed. "That's ancient. There's no way this just surfaced randomly." Frank stood, brushing concrete dust from his coat. "That's the part that's bothering me." Mike added, "Diesel says there's more. He hasn't left the edge of that wall since we stopped the drill." Diesel was now standing again, tail high, pacing a wide arc around the site. "He's picking up residuals," Carmen said softly. "You think we've got a full body?" "I think," Frank replied, "we've got a full damn mystery." Love stories where animals help uncover buried truths? Subscribe now to Heroes for Animals, where the bravest paws walk alongside the bravest people. Real heroes, real rescues, real justice. That night, Frank sat alone at his desk, the glow of the desk lamp reflecting off the tarnished student ID. He typed her name into every missing persons database he had access to. Nothing. Not in Greensboro, not in Chapel Hill, Not even nationally, no police report, no Amber Alert, no family claim. It was like Emily Carter had never disappeared, because no one had reported her gone, which in a way was worse. He scrolled through the archived news clippings from '94, a few faculty retirements, a new chemistry building. Nothing about a student disappearance. No candlelight vigils. No grieving roommates. It was like she never existed. Diesel wouldn't stop pacing. At dawn, Frank returned to the site with Mike and Carmen. The forensics team set up a grid, and Diesel immediately led them 15 feet beyond the original slab to the old admin building's northeast corner. Another bark. 2 more. Then he sat. By 10:15 a.m., the dig team had uncovered bones, clearly human, partially mummified beneath layers of compacted soil and concrete. A sweatshirt with a faded university logo was wrapped around the torso. Carmen swallowed hard. Female, around 18 to 20. Clothes fit the era. Frank looked down into the hole, fists clenched. He didn't say a word. As Diesel sat beside the dig site, silent and watchful, Frank looked up at the admin building looming behind them. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide this girl, and someone had succeeded for 13 years. But Diesel had found her, and Frank Ramirez was going to find who buried her, no matter what. The early morning fog hadn't lifted yet, clinging to the Greensboro University campus like a heavy veil. Diesel stood still at the edge of the dig site, nose twitching, tail low. There were no students laughing on their way to class, no coffee carts buzzing with undergrads, just quiet, and the slow scrape of a forensic trowel through dirt that had kept a secret for over a decade. Detective Frank Ramirez sipped the last of his gas station coffee, watching the young technician brush dirt from a slender femur. "You ever get used to this?" the kid asked, not looking up. "No," Frank said, "and if you do, it's time to quit." Beside him, Carmen Ellis was on the phone, talking with state records about missing student reports from the 1990s. Her tone was sharp but calm, the way she always was when she was trying not to freak out. "I know it's been 13 years, she said into the receiver. "That's why it matters now." She hung up and walked over, rubbing the back of her neck. Still no missing person report for Emily Carter. No official record of her disappearance. According to the University of North Carolina, she was granted a temporary academic leave in spring of '94 and then just never returned. Frank stared at her. They didn't follow up? They closed the file in December of that same year, marked as voluntary withdrawal. No red flags, no family contact, nothing. He muttered, "You don't just walk off the face of the earth without someone noticing." Carmen nodded. "Unless someone makes damn sure of it." Inside campus archives, a stack of dusty storage boxes sat untouched since dial-up internet was a thing. Carmen and Frank were granted access by the university's new administration, eager to cooperate now that the media had caught wind of the discovery. Look for any program files from '94, internships, research grants, anything she might have been part of, Frank said, flipping through a brittle ledger. Carmen dug through folders labeled Special Studies, Spring 1994. "Bingo," she whispered, holding up a manila folder with the name Dr. Walter Preston. Frank looked up. "The current dean?" "Yup. Back then he was an assistant professor. Oversaw the Summer Heritage Architecture program." She opened the folder. Inside were project notes, budget forms, and a roster of students involved. Emily Carter's name was listed, highlighted in yellow. "Yeah," Frank clenched his jaw. "So she was part of one of Preston's pet projects, and the only one from that group who never made it to graduation," Carmen added. Back at the dig site, Diesel circled once and let out a short bark, drawing attention to a second patch of earth. The forensic team dug down and found more. An old cassette tape, partially melted, labeled Student Audio Log, April 24, 1994. Carmen took it immediately to evidence processing. By late afternoon, she was seated in front of an old cassette player, the kind they only kept around for strange cases like this. She pressed play. Static. Then a voice. Young, clear, a little nervous. "This is Emily Carter. I'm recording this in case something happens to me." Frank turned sharply in his chair. Carmen didn't move, eyes fixed on the tape deck. "There are inconsistencies in the structural records. Buildings listed as historic restorations were actually new builds. The documents have been altered. And Dr. Preston, he knows. He told me to stop asking questions. Said if I kept digging, I'd lose my spot in the program. But I think it's bigger than that. I think there's fraud." Static again. The tape clicked to a stop. Frank stood slowly. That girl found something she wasn't supposed to. Carmen rewound the tape. And Preston made sure she never told anyone. They paid a visit to the dean's office the next morning. It was all polished wood, glass awards, and photos of him shaking hands with governors and donors. Dean Walter Preston had aged well. Silver hair, sharp suit, eyes like polished steel. "Detective Ramirez, Ms. Ellis," he said smoothly, gesturing to the leather chairs. "I heard you've been busy on our campus." "Let's skip the polite part," Frank said. "You remember a student named Emily Carter?" Preston tilted his head. "The name sounds vaguely familiar, but it's been so many years. She was in your summer program in '94. Never made it out," Carmen said. Preston frowned. "That's a serious claim." Frank tossed a printed copy of the student roster on the table. "She's right here, but we can't find any proof she left campus. We found her body under the North Wing building, along with this." He held up the plastic evidence bag with the melted cassette. Preston's smile faded. "We also found changes to university records that match Emily's claims," Carmen added. "You signed off on them." Preston stood up, hands behind his back. "I don't appreciate the implication. I've given this institution 25 years of service and buried one student underneath it," Frank said. The dean's jaw twitched. "This investigation isn't going away," Frank continued. "You were the last person seen with Emily Carter. You personally ordered a pour of concrete in a section that didn't need it, days after she was last heard from." "She asked too many questions," Preston said, voice tight, "and she didn't understand discretion." Frank rose. "Thanks for confirming what we already suspected." They got the search warrant 2 days later. Diesel was the first to step inside the dean's private residence on the edge of campus. Nose low, body alert. He led officers through the living room, down the hallway, and into a locked study filled with antiques. Then he stopped in front of a tall bookshelf and began scratching. Behind the shelf was a false wall. Inside, a fireproof safe. They cracked it open within the hour. Inside, they found dozens of student files, surveillance photos, and a notebook that matched Preston's handwriting. Dozens of receipts for private consulting fees, fake restoration contracts, and worst of all, a second cassette. Carmen played it later that night. It was dated 2 days after Emily's log. Preston's voice. "She confronted me tonight, said she had proof. She threatened to go public. I had no choice. No choice. I'm not letting some girl ruin everything I've built." The tape ended with a long silence. Then the sound of a door closing. Back at headquarters, Frank stood in front of the evidence board. Photos of Emily, construction permits, Preston's signature, maps of the campus, and Diesel, sitting faithfully under the whiteboard, ears perked. "You're the only one who listened when no one else did," Frank said quietly. Diesel just blinked. Emily Carter had walked into a lie 13 years ago. She died trying to tell the truth, but now the truth was speaking back. Through a cassette, through a German shepherd's nose, through the cracks in a foundation that was never meant to be opened again. And this case? It had only just begun. A week after the discovery, the sun hadn't dared touch the foundation of the old North Wing again. It was as if the land itself was ashamed of what it had hidden for 13 years. Diesel trotted beside Detective Frank Ramirez through the morning chill, his paws crunching over gravel, his nose already working. The German Shepherd hadn't missed a day. While officers changed shifts and press crews came and went, Diesel remained, quiet, driven, focused. Something inside him knew they weren't done. Frank adjusted his coat and stopped near the temporary forensics tent, where Carmen Ellis was already leaning over a table stacked with photo evidence and notes. "He's back again," she said with a nod toward Diesel. Frank smirked. "He punched in before I did." She slid a folder across the table. The lab confirmed the handwriting in Preston's journal matches every signature on the altered project files. The notebook was basically a roadmap of his crimes. Fake renovations, pocketed grants, false student names, and payments for silence. Frank opened the folder and stared at the page. He really thought he could outsmart time. Carmen said nothing. She pulled up a chair and sat with a sigh. "Frank, we ran facial recognition on some of those students listed in Preston's files. You're not going to like what I found." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Go on." 4 of them were real people, real IDs, but none of them were ever enrolled here. Preston used stolen identities. 2 girls were reported missing in other states, one from Illinois, one from Georgia. Same pattern, young, female, smart, and all interested in historic preservation or architecture. Frank swore under his breath. So Emily wasn't his only victim. "No," Carmen said grimly. "Just the first one we've found." Meanwhile, Diesel was pulling again. He led Mike Brewster, his handler, around the outer edge of the construction site toward the far east lawn, where a standalone maintenance shed sat, quiet and unremarkable. "Easy, boy," Mike said. "You sure about this?" Diesel sniffed along the foundation, circled, then pawed at the ground near the back wall. Mike radioed in. "I think we got something. East side of the admin lawn. Diesel's fixated again." Frank and Carmen arrived minutes later. By then, Diesel was pacing tight circles, tail rigid, ears forward. He barked twice. Short, sharp, urgent. They called in the forensics team to open the site. Within the hour, they found a metal box buried in shallow ground beneath the shed's back corner. Inside were photo slides, more student ID cards, and one item that made Carmen physically flinch: a charm bracelet with 5 butterfly charms. Just like the one Emily wore. Frank picked it up slowly, his voice low. He was keeping trophies. "Like a serial predator," Carmen added. "Not just a fraud, not just a killer. This was someone who liked to remember." The press was relentless. By mid-afternoon, news vans lined the edge of the campus. Reporters from every network you could name stood in wool coats and tried to smile for the camera while asking about murder, corruption, and a dog named Diesel. The university tried to stay neutral, but parents were calling. Alumni were furious. Students were scared. At the heart of it, Preston still sat in holding, silent, smug, waiting for his lawyer. Frank watched him through the two-way glass. "This guy's calculating," Carmen muttered behind him. "He hasn't said a word since the arrest. Not one." "He's waiting for something," Frank said. "Or someone." That night, Frank drove out to a residential neighborhood on the north side of town. Tree-lined streets, tidy yards, porch lights glowing like nothing bad ever happened there. But something had. He knocked on the door of a small white house. After a few moments, a woman in her early 50s answered. Sweater wrapped tight, eyes cautious. "Mrs. Carter?" Frank asked gently. "Yes? I'm Detective Ramirez. May I come in?" She stepped aside wordlessly. The living room was warm, worn, and filled with quiet pain. A faded high school graduation photo of Emily sat in a wooden frame above the mantel. Frank sat across from her as she cradled a mug of tea. "We didn't know," she said quietly. "They told us she went on leave. They said she never came back, but nobody ever came asking. Not until you." "We believe your daughter was silenced for what she discovered," Frank said carefully, "and we think she wasn't the only one." Her hands trembled. "Mrs. Carter, Did Emily ever say anything about feeling unsafe, about anyone watching her? She nodded slowly. She called one night, late, said her professor was too involved, controlling. But she was so excited about the program. I told her to come home. She said she couldn't, not yet, that she had something important to finish. Frank leaned forward. That call. What date was it? April 23rd, 1994. Carmen's voice echoed in his memory. Emily's last journal entry was April 24th. She died trying to finish it, Frank whispered. Mrs. Carter wiped her eyes. I've waited 13 years to hear someone say that out loud. The next morning, Diesel led them to a basement room under the West Library wing. It had been used for storage since 2005, but the dust told a different story. Diesel scratched near the back wall, then stopped and stared. Frozen. Carmen and Mike scanned the wall with a thermal camera. There's a void, Carmen said, something hollow behind it. They broke through with a hammer. Inside was a small, dark room. Bare walls, concrete floor, and something deeply chilling. A stack of old audio tapes, each labeled by hand with first names and dates. Carmen read aloud. Sophia, 1996. Rachel, 1998. Amanda, 2002. Frank's stomach turned. These girls never had a voice, but he recorded them anyway. This is evidence, Carmen said, and testimony. These are their voices, their truth. Frank looked down at Diesel, sitting silent, still watching the shadows. Bring in every agency we've got. We're not just solving a case anymore. We're uncovering history. That evening, Frank returned to his office. The walls were covered now, names, photos, documents, pins, and red string, like the inside of his mind stretched across corkboard. He sat back, rubbing his eyes. Then his phone rang. It was Carmen. You're going to want to see this, she said. The FBI ran background on Preston's overseas records. Turns out, before he came to Greensboro, he taught abroad. Spain, Argentina, Colombia. Frank sat up. Same MO? Disappearances, all female students, all connected to restoration projects. We've got 3 potential cold cases in Madrid that match his travel dates. Frank stood, stunned. We're not just dealing with a local killer, Carmen said. He's been running this game for decades. Different names, different jobs, same pattern. Frank looked out the window, his chest tight. And Diesel was the one who cracked it open. That night, while the city slept, Diesel laid curled in the corner of the squad room, nose resting on his paws. Around him were boxes, boxes filled with truth, with names, faces, voices, timelines, boxes full of girls like Emily Carter. He didn't understand case files, but he knew the smell of unfinished stories, and he was still listening, still waiting, still digging. The sky was bruised with gray when Detective Frank Ramirez pulled into the cracked driveway of the Preston estate. The place didn't scream danger, it whispered it. A pristine 2-story colonial nestled behind weeping willows and trimmed hedges, with a mailbox that still read Dr. Walter Preston, Ph.D., in elegant brass lettering. Inside sat the man who, until 3 weeks ago, had been the face of Greensboro University. And now, he was the reason Diesel wouldn't stop pacing at night. Frank got out of the car and looked toward the side yard. There was Diesel, nose to the ground again, tail swinging in that now familiar pattern, not wagging in joy. This was the pendulum of certainty. Diesel had smelled something. Again, Mike Brewster, Diesel's handler, joined Frank at the porch. He keeps coming back here, Mike said quietly. Every time we're near this place, it's like he remembers something the rest of us missed. Frank nodded. He's not the only one who's been having trouble sleeping. They knocked once, no answer. This time, they had a warrant. The house was silent except for the soft creak of floorboards under Frank's boots and the faint scuff of Diesel's paws as they moved through the lower level. Carmen Ellis arrived 10 minutes later with the digital forensics team. They split into groups. Frank and Diesel went upstairs. Carmen took the office. Mike checked the garage. Diesel moved like a whisper, stopping every few feet to sniff low and scan corners. Then, near the end of the upstairs hallway, he paused. His body stiffened, ears erect. He scratched at a panel in the hallway, just to the left of a family portrait. The wallpaper peeled slightly at the bottom, exposing a cut seam in the drywall. "Hidden access," Frank murmured. They pried it open carefully. Behind it, they found a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Not the basement. Another sublevel that hadn't appeared on any blueprint of the house. Carmen appeared beside Frank. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Frank looked down into the black. That this man was hiding more than tax fraud and old tapes? The stairs creaked with each step as they descended into the forgotten room. It smelled of damp wood and mildew, but beneath it, something else. Diesel's hackles raised. Frank flicked on his flashlight. The beam caught shelves lined with cardboard boxes, old floppy disks, VHS tapes, and thick manila folders labeled with years. 1993, 1994, 1995. Years of his crimes, Carmen whispered. Diesel stopped near a far cabinet. He pawed gently, then sat. Frank opened the drawer. Inside were photographs, black and white prints of young women, all headshots, some smiling, others clearly candid. "Are these his students?" Carmen asked, barely above a whisper. Frank flipped one over. It had a name and date scribbled on the back. Isabella M., Argentina, 1996. "Holy hell," he muttered. Carmen's voice broke. He was cataloging them, like specimens. There were letters, too, unsent, notes, fragments of apologies never delivered. One stood out. "She wouldn't stay quiet, I warned her." Frank didn't need to ask who she was. They were in the belly of the monster's house now, and it was full of ghosts. Later that night, Carmen stood by the evidence table, overwhelmed. "We've got enough for international charges. Spain, Argentina, Colombia. This guy's resume is a global crime scene." Frank nodded but stayed quiet. Diesel, curled beside his desk, lifted his head at the sound of Frank's phone buzzing. "Unknown caller," Frank answered. There was a pause, then a voice. Female, shaky, middle-aged. "Detective Ramirez?" "Yes." "My name's Karen Wheeler. I think I knew someone who worked with Dr. Preston." Frank motioned for Carmen to start recording. "Go on, Ms. Wheeler." "I was a student here in '94. I was in the same program as Emily Carter." Frank straightened. "Why haven't you come forward before?" "I didn't know she was dead. They told us she dropped out. I didn't know until I saw the news last night. I saw her photo on TV. I can't stop shaking." Frank kept his voice even. "What do you remember?" A long pause. "He used to call students to his house. Said it was part of mentoring. Emily went once. She told me afterwards something was wrong. She said she found things in his office, papers, plans, that he was using university money for fake restorations. She said she was going to report it." Frank's pulse quickened. "And then?" he asked. "She vanished." Frank exhaled. "Ms. Wheeler, I need you to come in. What you know may help bring justice." She paused again. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll come." The next morning, Karen Wheeler arrived in a beige coat and trembling hands. She hadn't aged much, still sharp eyes, same long braid from her student ID picture they found in the archives. She gave a sworn statement, confirmed Emily's suspicions, and provided two things that made Frank's gut turn. A photograph of Emily and Preston together at a department dinner. Emily looking wary, Preston with his hand a little too close to her shoulder. An old notebook Emily had given her just in case. She'd kept it for years without knowing what it really was. Inside, hand-drawn floor plans of the university's north wing before and after Preston's fraudulent modifications. "That girl," Carmen whispered, flipping through the pages, "was going to blow the lid off everything." Frank looked at Diesel, who lay by the door, ears twitching at every word. She still might. That afternoon, Preston finally cracked. Not because of evidence, not because of the threat of international extradition, but because he saw Diesel's photograph in the newspaper. Frank brought it into the room. Just a shot of Diesel standing by the dig site, his nose pressed against the earth. Preston's eyes locked on it, and for the first time he looked afraid. "You're scared of a dog?" Frank asked. "He's the one who found her, isn't he?" Preston whispered. "He's the reason this all came undone." Frank didn't answer. Preston leaned back, exhaling like a man who finally saw the end of the road. "She wasn't supposed to find the records. But she did. She was too smart. She had to be stopped." "You killed her." Preston didn't deny it. "She walked into my house with evidence," he said. "Said she was going public. I panicked." Frank stared at him in disgust. "So you buried her like trash?" Preston laughed bitterly. "I buried her beneath the foundation of an institution that would never question me." "But a dog did," Frank said. "A dog you didn't see coming." That evening, Frank, Carmen, and Mike stood at the newly built memorial site just outside the campus library. The plaque now read, "In memory of Emily Carter and the voices that were silenced. May truth always find its way to the surface." Diesel sat quietly in front of it, eyes on the flowers people had left. Students, faculty, survivors. Carmen knelt beside him. "You did good, boy. You brought her home." Frank folded his arms, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "Truth has a funny way of waiting," he said. "But justice walks on four paws sometimes." "And Diesel?" He was still listening, because somewhere beneath another slab, another girl might still be waiting. And he wasn't done digging. Not yet. The morning air was brisk in Greensboro, laced with the scent of wet pine and old secrets. Diesel, ever alert, trotted alongside Detective Frank Ramirez across the campus lawn. Students bustled past with earbuds and coffee cups, unaware that beneath their very steps lay a graveyard of truths, finally disturbed. It had been 3 days since Dr. Walter Preston confessed to Emily Carter's murder, and to several others spanning nearly a decade. Still, there were unanswered questions. Emily's notebook, photographs, and the hidden room in Preston's home told only part of the story. The rest was still buried, and Diesel wasn't done. Frank stopped beside the freshly laid memorial, where someone had left a single Polaroid taped to the stone plaque. A grainy image of 4 young women at a study table, heads bent in laughter. Emily was one of them. The others remained unidentified. "Diesel's been circling the archives building," Mike Brewster said, walking up behind Frank. 3 times yesterday. Same path, same patch of grass. Frank sighed. The one part of Campus Preston always said was off-limits during renovations. Mike nodded. "You think there's more?" Frank didn't answer. Diesel already had. They secured permits within hours. That patch of grass turned out to cover a sealed storage hatch, one never included in university blueprints. The hatch, rusted at the seams, took 2 crowbars and an angle grinder to break open. As the lid creaked back, a rush of stale air poured out, tinged with dust, and something older. Something wrong. Frank climbed down first, flashlight in hand. Diesel followed without hesitation, his paws echoing softly on the concrete steps. It was another room, and it had not seen daylight in decades. The walls were lined with shelves of academic materials. Outdated textbooks, capped film canisters, bound theses. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary archive, until Diesel growled low and sharp. He'd stopped in front of a storage cabinet marked Ratured Faculty Records, 1990-1999. Carmen Ellis joined them moments later, frowning. "This room doesn't exist on any map." Frank tugged open the file drawer. Inside were folders, dozens, each marked with a woman's name, student ID, and a termination status. Withdrew, transferred, or simply unresponsive. He read the first 3 names aloud. Carmen froze. "Those girls were never listed as missing," she whispered. "They just disappeared from the system." Frank's jaw clenched. Preston erased them, not just physically, but administratively. Diesel let out a sharp bark. At the back of the drawer was a folder that didn't match the others. No label. Inside, a torn sheet of notepaper. A single line, scrawled in panicked handwriting. Her name is Nora Whitman. She never left. The team dove into university archives. Nora Whitman had enrolled in 1995 as a first-year sociology major. She'd shown promise, published a peer-reviewed essay as a sophomore, and then vanished. No transfer, no graduation, no obituary. The university had no exit paperwork, no dorm checkout form, not even a formal withdrawal notice. She'd simply stopped existing. Carmen looked at the photo of Nora pulled from an old yearbook. "Frank," she said carefully, "Nora worked in the same department as Preston. She was assigned to help with construction logistics." Frank's stomach dropped. "She had keys and blueprints." Prints. Mike tapped his tablet. "I cross-referenced faculty badge scans from 1995. Nora's ID was last used the night after a major budget transfer Preston submitted. That night was also the last time her name ever showed up in any official system." Frank returned to the sealed room with a fresh team. Diesel led them to a side wall, concrete, but with a small crack near the baseboard. "You smell something, boy?" Frank asked. Diesel whined. They began drilling. 6 hours later, they hit an air pocket, and behind the false wall was a small, bricked-off alcove. Inside lay the remains of a young woman, curled in on herself, still dressed in her university windbreaker. An ID card sat beside her, worn but readable. "Nora Whitman." Carmen covered her mouth. "She was buried alive." Frank clenched his fists. He used the university to entomb them. Diesel sat beside the bones without barking, without growling, just watching, as if finally someone had been heard. The case exploded nationally. Preston's confession was amended to include Nora's death, though the way he described it left the room cold. "She was going to expose the embezzlement," he said. "It was her or me." He never mentioned regret, only inconvenience. By week's end, federal agencies joined the investigation. Diesel was profiled on the front page of the Greensboro Sentinel, dubbed the dog that brought down a genius. A week later, Diesel's picture appeared on Good Morning America. Frank didn't care about the press, but he did care about closure. And one night, as he sat with Diesel on the back steps of his house, he admitted it out loud. "I think you saved me too, pal," he whispered, running his hand down Diesel's strong back. "I didn't know how heavy this job had gotten until you lightened the load." Diesel rested his chin on Frank's boot, silent, but not quiet. In the months that followed, families of the forgotten girls began stepping forward. People who'd believed they'd been abandoned now had answers. One mother, tear-streaked and trembling, placed a hand on Diesel's head at a press conference. "My daughter always wanted a dog," she whispered. "I guess she finally got one who came for her." The university established a new scholarship in the victims' names. They renamed the campus green where Nora had been buried, Whitman Field. At the dedication ceremony, Frank stood with Carmen, Mike, and Diesel, who, though now 7, still sniffed every wind shift like the world depended on it. "You think he'll ever slow down?" Carmen asked, half smiling. Frank looked at Diesel, who was already pacing near a line of trees, nose twitching. "Not until the world's clean," Frank said. "And maybe not even then." That night, as campus lights blinked out one by one, Diesel sat alone by the edge of the memorial, eyes focused on the darkness. He didn't bark. He didn't move. But he listened, because somewhere in the rustle of leaves or the whisper of dirt, there might still be another name, another voice, another girl waiting to be heard. And Diesel? He was still listening, because justice never sleeps, especially not when it walks on 4 legs. The courthouse in downtown Greensboro looked different in the morning light, less like a building and more like a final reckoning. Reporters lined the sidewalks. Camera crews jockeyed for angles. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that tightens around the ribs and doesn't let go. Frank Ramirez stood just inside the security checkpoint, adjusting his tie. He hated ties, always had. But today wasn't about comfort. It was about closure. Diesel sat beside him, tail calm, eyes steady. "You ready, partner?" Frank asked, not expecting an answer. But Diesel gave a small, slow wag. That was enough. Walter Preston's trial was the kind that filled every seat in the gallery and spilled into national news cycles. 14 victims had been confirmed. More were still under investigation. Each name now etched in a growing list of lives that had once slipped through the cracks of silence. Carmen Ellis sat near the front, her laptop open, fingers still. Next to her, Mike Brewster quietly handed tissues to a tearful father who had flown in from Oregon, one of the few people still alive who had once filed a complaint about his daughter's sudden transfer in 1997. It had gone nowhere then. It mattered now. When Preston entered, shackled and hollow-eyed, Diesel stiffened but did not bark. He didn't need to. His work was done. The prosecution laid out the timeline meticulously. The abuse of authority, the falsified paperwork, the physical entombments in buildings Preston himself had recommended for renovation, some of which had already been demolished before Diesel's involvement began. They played video footage of Diesel's discoveries, his alert at the foundation, his persistent pacing at the archive's lawn, the dig that uncovered Nora Whitman. The jury watched in silence. In the back row, someone whispered, "That dog did what people wouldn't." They weren't wrong. On the fourth day of trial, something unexpected happened. Preston broke, not in confession, but in rage. "You think a damn dog unraveled me?" he shouted, standing mid-testimony. "You think a mutt with a badge is some kind of hero?" Frank stood calmly. Diesel remained still, watching. "I built this place," Preston roared, "and now I'm being judged by a dog." "You're being judged by the truth," Frank said, voice steady. "He just helped us hear it." The courtroom froze, and for the first time, Walter Preston sat down and said nothing. The verdict came fast. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole. No appeals. No more hiding. When the sentence was read aloud, the families wept. Not out of vengeance, but relief. A long, aching exhale that had waited years to escape. Frank walked Diesel out the courthouse steps into sunlight that felt a little warmer than usual. And someone clapped. Then another, and another. It wasn't loud. It wasn't for show. It was just honest, grateful applause for a dog who never once gave up. Over the following weeks, the university initiated a complete reform of its student reporting system. A task force, named Diesel's Watch, was formed to investigate long-dormant cold cases across multiple campuses in the Southeast. Diesel himself was awarded the Medal of Valor by the state governor. At the ceremony, Frank had to gently nudge him away from sniffing the governor's pant leg. He just didn't care about medals. He cared about what was buried and making sure it stayed unearthed. But time, as it does, moved forward. Diesel was now approaching 8, still strong, still sharp. But Frank knew. The long nights were getting harder on his joints. The cold seeped in quicker than it used to. Diesel had earned his rest. So one day, Frank brought him to a quiet, fenced-in ranch just outside Asheville. Acres of grass, rolling hills, a wide porch where the breeze always seemed to know when to blow. "This is yours now," Frank said, handing the leash over to the woman waiting by the gate. Retired officer, 2 acres, no kids, just love. Diesel turned to look at Frank, eyes calm. Frank knelt down and pressed his forehead to the shepherd's. "You changed my life, boy. You saved so many." Diesel licked his chin, then padded inside. Frank didn't cry, not until the car door shut. Years passed. Greensboro changed, but the legend of the K9, who wouldn't stop listening, grew. Diesel's portrait now hung in the lobby of the police K9 Training Academy. Beside it, a plaque read, "Some heroes don't speak, but they make sure we hear what matters." Carmen and Mike eventually got married. They named their son Elias. He called every dog he saw Diesel, even if it was a Chihuahua. Frank finally retired. He still visited Diesel's ranch every few weeks, until one cool spring morning a call came. Diesel had passed peacefully in his sleep. The rancher said he had spent the day walking the perimeter, nose still twitching at the wind, eyes sharp as ever. He went to bed under the stars and never woke up. Frank drove there alone. He brought a single item with him, the tarnished butterfly pendant from Emily Carter's wallet. He buried it beneath the tree where Diesel had loved to lie. No headstone, no fuss, just the sound of birds and peace. A month later, a new puppy was born at the K9 unit. Alert, curious, eager to learn. He had Diesel's eyes. They named him Echo, because some legacies don't end. They echo, in every sniff, every paw step, every truth waiting beneath the silence. Thank you for following Diesel's journey with us in Buried Truth, the K9 that heard what the world forgot. What would you have done if Diesel hadn't spoken through his instincts? Do you believe animals know what we choose to ignore? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in justice, healing, and the silent heroes who walk beside us, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where real stories live.